Anyways, I'm just going to read. This is my first patient I ever had. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. And this was at Beth Israel Hospital. The first patient I was assigned to was a 55-year-old gentleman named Frank, only he pronounced it Franck with a French accent. I distinctly knew his real name was Frank and had to be from the north end of Boston and was very Italian. But I let him think that he was Frank from Paris. Didn't he know his dripping gold chains were a dead giveaway? Anyway, Frank had had a heart attack, damaged one of his coronary arteries, and was now in the healing process. He had already been in the hospital a week and was ready for discharge when he developed chest pain again. Was sent to the coronary care unit where the doctors ruled out another heart attack and sent him back to the regular medical floor. That's where I came in. I was a student nurse until discharge. I was instructed to help with his personal care, take his vital signs, and follow up with the doctor's orders. The first 2 days went well. I made his bed, took his blood pressure every 2 hours, and gave him a back rub and offered support. This is a breeze, I said to my roommate Tricia. He's a nice guy, easy to take care of. But the next day, Frank was waiting for me, said he didn't feel good and was too tired to wash up. I said, not according to the report I received from the night nurse. She said he was fine and slept all night. I said, okay, Frank, I'll report this to the charge nurse, and started to walk out the door. No, he said, just get me a basin and I'll wash up. So I proceeded with the daily routine, placed the basement with hot soapy water in front of him with the face cloth and towel, and started to leave the room. He called to me, Katie, I really need help, please wash me. He proceeded to hand me the face cloth, pull down the sheet where he was totally naked, genitals exposed, and said, please wash me. I started to stutter. For Frank, I need to ask my instructor as I backed out of the room, turning totally red. I caught my instructor before she headed into another patient's room and told her the story. Do you think he's capable of washing himself? Yes, I said, I don't want to go near him. My instructor came back into the room, retook his vital signs, and pronounced him healthy enough to wash his own groin. So, like, to this day, I remember that. I was really frightened. So, anyways, that was the very beginning. And then I went on year by year, as I said. And I got to 1972 and 1973, and I really wanted to skip those years. I think I'll hop right over them. I didn't want to remember them. But, you know, I'm a God person, and God was nudging me and saying, you're not going to get away with this. You got to face it. And the reason I wanted to forget is that I had a drug addiction. I can't say really what happened. I just got caught up in the era, and I started to use drugs. My parents put me in a rehab. They thought I was better. I didn't get better. I went back to nursing, and I ended up losing my nursing license. So I lost it for a couple of years. And it was devastating. I really hit bottom then, and it was so hard, and I almost didn't write about it because nobody in the town I was living in knew this. This was like ages ago. But I did, I wrote it, and I'm glad I did, because when I would go to book signings, I'd have people come up to me, like parents, and saying, my daughter's a nurse and she has a drug addiction, and what can we do to help her? Or the nurses themselves, they would come up and say, I have an addiction, what can I do? And the thing is, and I'm not trying to frighten anybody, because more than likely you won't run into this if you're ever hospitalized, but 13% of nurses have some kind of an addiction. There's a lot of injuries, and there's a lot of prescription drugs, and you get addicted. So I had the opportunity to share with them about the SARP program, which is through the Division of Registration in Nursing. And it stands for Substance Abuse Rehab Program. So what they do is they're accountable for what they did, and they have to go to meetings, and they have to get counseling, and then after 3 or 4 years they can get their nurse's license. They had it suspended so they can get it back and nurse again. So I'm really glad I put that in there, and I think it was helpful to some people. Then I just slowly went on, and each chapter took me on different journeys as I wrote. I thought a lot about my parents during the time because they were very helpful to me in the beginning when I started my nursing career. And then when I went back for my RN, my mom babysat and my dad paid for it. So I was very appreciative of that. And I cover Medicare and HMOs and how it has really changed the system. Like I said in the beginning with Joe, I was able to go into his house twice a day and his insurance would cover it. That's almost unheard of now. If you have an injury or something, you're depending on family members to kick in. And with home care now, I mean, we have a lot of patients 85 and 90 years old and they have like ulcers on their legs or something. And we're expecting that 90-year-old patient's wife to take care of him and learn the dressing changes. There's something wrong with our system, there really is, but hopefully there will be changes. So as I said, my mom had a lot to do with my nursing school, so I just want to read you a little more about this. The title is End of the Journey. Excuse me. My mom had gotten sick in June of 1998. She was 92 years old and had never been sick a day in her life, and doctors couldn't find a definitive diagnosis for her. She's dwindling, my sister Denise's boyfriend Alan said. Alan is an ER doctor and therefore qualified to know. How often I had heard that term, dwindling and dying, but I didn't want to apply it to my mother. The fact was she was dwindling. She had lost her spirit, her will to live. Her beautiful green eyes were fading, getting closer to death every day. She was at the end of her journey. The beginning of July, she started dragging her left leg. Her doctor had her admitted to a rehab center to try and have a physical therapist work with her. But she developed a blood clot in her leg and went downhill from there. Her bowel perforated one night while Denise and I were visiting. She suddenly became cold and clammy, started to shiver, and then vomited up bile. The ambulance quickly transferred to the emergency room. After a CAT scan, she was diagnosed with cancer. A tumor was leaning on her bowel and caused it to perforate. For 48 hours, I watched the nurses and aides take care of my mom, rub her back, medicate her, turn and position her in bed, keep her pain-free. I watched this beautiful Scottish woman who had brought me into this world slowly slip from it. Each of her 7 children got to spend alone time with her before she died. I held her hand Sunday morning, heard her bracelet jingle, a familiar sound, and it was a bracelet with charms of all her children on it, something she never removed. My mom turned, looked at me, and said, "Am I dying, Kate?" I couldn't reply right away. 30 seconds went by. I squeezed her hand and nodded yes. "Are you in pain, Mama?" I asked, realizing I hadn't called her Mama in over 40 years. She shook her head no, with a look of acceptance. She'd be with my dad soon. My mom died about 4 a.m. the next morning with my sister Irene at her side. She heard her take her last breath. Renee said she held her hand after she died, said the rosary, and tried to absorb the fact our mother had just left this world. I had read somewhere that dying was as easy as walking from one room to another, the passage graceful and easy. Denise and I joined Irene in the hospital room, looked at my mother's blue-tinged corpse. Denise said, "You've certainly seen better days, Mom." We laughed, simply because my mother was a jokester and she would have loved this conversation. So anyways, this was this book. Now this was the easy part in writing, I realized. The hard part was getting it out there. The publishing process was not easy. I had a good friend in Woburn, Marie Cody, who writes for the Daily Times. Maybe some of you in Reading know her. She writes there as well. And she kind of guided me. She said, belong to the National Writers Union, and then gave me this big, huge, thick book, Writer's Market, that was full of agents and publishing companies that I could refer to. So I simply wrote out a query letter to a lot of these people, and for those of you who don't know what a query is, it's kind of just like a synopsis of the book and who your target audience would be. So I went forward and did that, and I sent out hundreds, and I got hundreds of rejections back. And I was told that would happen. They said not to take it personally, that this happens when you're trying to get published. But it was tough to take because, I mean, I was working almost full time, and I still had a younger one at home, and it wasn't that easy to do, but I kept sending them out and sending them out. And I remember the story of Stephen King. He sent out thousands, and he was so sick of sending them out, he stopped. He hated the rejection, but his wife didn't stop. She kept sending them out. And we all know Stephen King today is multi-millionaire. So anyways,